Good evening. In compliance with Chapter 551 Open Meetings of the Texas Government Code, I call to order a work session of the Board of Trustees of the Austin Independent School District for Tuesday, March 24th, 2026 at 6:04 p.m. A quorum of the board is physically present at Austin ISD Central Office to conduct this meeting. This meeting is being broadcast on cable channel 22 through Spectrum, Astound Broadband, and on channel 99 through AT&T Uverse. Closed captioning in English is available on these platforms for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We have provided an opportunity for limited public comment this evening. This is an opportunity for the board to take part in listening to our community. While we wish we could respond or provide feedback, the Texas Open Meetings Act does not authorize a board to discuss or act on comments or complaints from members of the public if the subject is not on the meeting agenda. Members of the public wishing to participate in the public comment portion of our meeting called a dedicated AISD phone line in advance of the meeting to audio record their remarks. And tonight we have one person who left a recorded message. We will now play that message for public comment. So please listen carefully.
This is Sharon Vane, the parent of 2 AISD graduates. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about next steps on the academic baseline and framework. I cannot overstate how important I think this is for the future of the district. When parents know what they can expect for their children and see that it is being delivered at every school, all else flows from there. To that end, I encourage our public conversations to be rooted in straightforward, easy to understand language instead of acronyms and pedagogical terms. Your audience for this is the community, both the ones who have chosen AISD and the ones who haven't yet. Help us believe again in the promise of all our AISD schools. Thank you.
Thank you to our caller. This concludes our public testimony, and you are free to share any other comments or questions on items with our board by email at trustees@austinisd.org. And we will now begin our work session. Superintendent Segura will kick us off.
Yes, thank you, President Boswell and trustees. I think we have some technical difficulties with broadcasting.
Just on AISD TV, but we have it on Facebook and YouTube.
Okay, we have it on Facebook and YouTube. Okay, so it's not streaming on TV, but it is on Facebook and YouTube. Okay, and if there's a change, then we'll inform the community and if we get that back online. Not sure what the issue is there. So thank you, trustees. Today, we're going to have a work session. Very much appreciate the ability to have a collaborative conversation and a dialogue as we cover different areas within our work. So I will have with me Ms. Katrina Montgomery, our CFO, who will cover and lead the budget portion of the conversation. We also have Dr. Marianne Maxwell, our Assistant Superintendent of Academics, that will lead us through the majority of the conversation when we're discussing academic vision and framework. And I will kick us off. And so one of the things that we have 3 hours of time allocated. We'll have a little bit in the beginning for work that's kind of overall, then budget, and then we'll tackle academic vision and framework, which will have the majority of the effort and time here. So one of the things that I think is very, very important is that we communicate it to our trustees and to our community and to all of our staff, all the work that's occurring within Austin ISD. When we talk about district priorities and initiatives and projects, they all consume resources, they all require thoughtful strategies, and they all require shared understanding to ensure that they're successful. And one of the things that we're attempting to do as we communicate with you all here are just the various efforts that are occurring in parallel within Austin ISD. And many of those have been communicated to me by way of the superintendent review or the work that we've done around the scorecard. And many of those are also ongoing efforts that have been going on for some time, but it's important to remember that they have not gone away. Like, the work is still there, and if we don't acknowledge that it's a significant lift within the system, then we can very easily kind of overwhelm and reduce our ability to be effective in implementation. So it's really, really important that we are always honest about what we're taking on and how much of an effort each one of these initiatives or priorities are. And so what we're going to do today, as I said before, is break down the conversation. We'll first talk about district priorities as we understand them. We'll talk about budget, and then we'll spend the majority of the time discussing academic vision and framework, which will be led by Dr. Mary Ann Maxwell. We'll have 120 minutes allocated for that, and certainly happy to make adjustments along the way if needed. So the purpose of our priorities, as I kind of just alluded to, was I think it's really important that we communicate the allocation of resources, right? Everything that we do in Austin ISD consumes resources. I think of resources as teachers' time, principals' time. Funding is certainly a resource. All the materials, all the things that we have and that we have to rely on to move the work. They're not infinite, right? They're finite. So we have to always be thinking about that balance if we're going to progress the work. A recognition of system strain. One of the things that I think is really important that I do as the leader of the organization is to really understand when it's too much or when we're pushing and moving the work in a way that is not going to ultimately move us in the right direction, but perhaps introduce implementation risk. And if we're not implementing with fidelity, I think the community and our staff lose trust in our ability to do the work. So it's really, really important that we're always talking about that and having that conversation. Fiscal and calendar year alignment. I think it's often not well known that there is a ebb and flow to the school year. You all know it as trustees. We always approve the budget in June. We start the school year off in August and September. We have we know when enrollment starts. There's always kind of a cadence to the school year, but and that drives many of our efforts, but there are also these other things that are multiple year efforts. And when you begin to look at where we are at various times in a school year, what you realize is that sometimes in the summer when it feels like things should be slowing down, in fact, the system as a whole is operating at a very, very high level and consuming tremendous amount of resources. And I think if we're not talking about it, then we can think that something should be added when in fact it shouldn't. And so it's really important that we talk about where that alignment occurs. I know you are getting ahead in this in the binder, and I that's great, but we'll get to those details in a moment. And the last thing I want to say is transparency and community, and really the work around engagement. When we talk about initiatives, we're talking about 18 to 24-month time horizons, right? So they're going to eclipse multiple fiscal years, multiple calendar years, and it's important that our trustees and community know when the milestones are going to come back to the board by way of perhaps it's a contract, perhaps it's a policy change, perhaps it's an amendment to a budget item. Like these things should be known well in advance so they make their way into our budget or into our calendar. And so if I surprise you with something and say, hey, trustees, this needs to happen now to support this initiative, I've not done my job, right? You should know well in advance that this aspect of the work is going to come before you at this time, and here's the reason why. And so that's the purpose of the work that we're going to be sharing with you today. When we work through the current kind of identified district priorities, I attempted to create a graphic to show what is currently kind of on, what we're currently taking on, right? Certainly, as I've heard from the board, accountability. We had this communicated by way of a constraint. It's also been communicated to me as part of my kind of evaluation process. In order to protect who we are, in order to ensure that our students are growing academically, we need to drive down the number of DNF campuses. And that shows itself by the TAP work. It shows by the investments we've made in our schools. So that is a huge, huge lift in the system. We've talked about that, but it's important that we always refer back to it as a district priority because it requires all of our attention, shared understanding, and a commitment to allocation of resources. Enrollment. Enrollment is something that I've talked about for quite some time. I think given the number of things we've been taking on over the last 2.5 years, it really hasn't been given the full attention. But as we kind of stabilize this system, as we think about enrollment and the unique opportunity we have moving forward, You're going to see a large focus of the administration to ensure that we are very thoughtful, we're strategic, we are doing things that maybe we haven't done in the past, and recognizing that perhaps spending dollars here will ultimately put us in a better position because we will be able to attract families who perhaps have left Austin ISD or attract families who are never in Austin ISD. And I think most importantly, retain those families who are already in Austin ISD. And so that is a big initiative. It's something that requires alignment between all of our divisions. And so you'll see that continue to be communicated in this way as a district priority. Academic vision and framework. Dr. Maxwell will spend the majority of the time here today talking about that work. It's something that we've committed to do. There will ultimately be lots of things in the system that have to be refined, updated, or modified due to the work that we do together. It's a long time coming, I would say, when you think about the last time we went through a strategic plan and vision, the last time our policies were updated. And so we're looking forward to the conversation. We're looking forward to the work. But it is going to be something that we all have to understand and be committed to in order to get this done. What I don't want to do is to start a process and not finish it, or not have the impact that we expect that it will, or that we would like it for it to have. The last thing on the top line here is special education. We have obviously achieved a significant milestone just a few weeks back when we were released from the TA Agreed Order. What I want to remind everybody is that the work still continues. We have, as a system, I think, done something that many didn't think we'd be able to accomplish, but now it's very, very important that we maintain that work, but also build from it. I view the first 2.5, 3 years of that work as, getting the systems in place, moving and ensuring compliance. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if we're going to embrace the inclusive, the inclusive model and own it the way that we should, we have to build from the foundation that we've put in place with the system improvements. And so that's work. It's a lot of work. And I'm fearful that if we forget that work is still going on, then we'll add something to our overall workload, and that could be compromised, which we're not going to do. On the bottom, we have budget, and I'll tell you why these are organized in this way. Budget is something that is it's cyclical in nature. It comes about kind of in a fairly defined time frame. It is work that ultimately is approved by the board, but there is a lot of work in it. There are hard decisions that we have to make. It is something that you'll see us come back to the board with ideas, with considerations, and so it is something that will continue to be a priority of ours until we are a stable system and we have gotten to a balanced budget and have built back up our fund balance to a 20% threshold. So that is going to continue to be a priority for us as a district. A lot of work, a lot of conversations that occur around that. At any time a decision is made, the implementation of the decision consumes a lot of effort as well, right? And so I think it's really, really important that we continue to have that in there. When you think about the work we've been doing as we support our families through transitions by way of consolidations, these are very, very thoughtful plans that have been built up when we are bringing school communities together. And it's really, really important that we execute on those plans and we do the work well to ensure that our families and students are successful starting the 26-27 school year. And so you think about the staff movement, you think about ensuring that our families have the options that we'd committed to them, making sure that we are providing adjustments where we need to, and then operationalize that in the summer so that everybody ends up where they need to be with plenty of time to welcome our students and be ready to go. It is a huge, huge lift. And so I don't know that we're often talking about it that way, but it is a significant lift and we have to get it right because we just have to. Bond work, 2022 bond program. A couple of years ago, we passed the largest bond in the history of Austin ISD. In that bond, there are dozens of large, $50 to $100 million projects, and over the last 2.5 years, we've seen the design complete, you've seen construction begin, and they're going to start to deliver. And so when you think about this summer and the following summers, you're going to see the largest movement of staff, students, and and really facility movement within Austin ISD history in our 145 years. So it's really, really important that we do that well. It's a commitment to our voters to hit these timelines. And so when you kind of juxtapose, the timeline associated with transition plans with the bond work, you realize that this summer is the single biggest move that we've had in the history of Austin ISD, bar none. And the logistics around that are something that have to be attended to, or else we will not be successful in March. And then I think it's always important, and I want to kind of acknowledge that strategic communication is something that is an area of kind of improvement as a district. There's so much going on, but we don't necessarily do as good a job as we could when it comes to telling our story, aligning all the work, communicating the why, and connecting all the dots. And so it is not necessarily an initiative, but is a system improvement that we're committed to doing. So that's why you see it there in a dashed line. So you're not going to see like the type of project plan that you would see with the other initiatives, but you will see a concerted effort to improve that area of the system. And so just so before I leave this slide, I just want to communicate there are things that are going to come to the board for updates, and we're going to get feedback, and there are other things that we are going to be providing monitoring updates. And so they're just going to be different because of where they are in the plan, right? Like the initiatives, the administrative work, we're owning that. We'll provide updates, but the type of input is just not required because it is more managerial and administrative than it is governance. So that is kind of why we've organized it in this way. It doesn't mean that there's not going to ever be input or updates. It just means that generally speaking, you would expect them to kind of be coordinated with the board in that way. So when you think about what this looks like, okay, well, every one of these tasks, every one of these initiatives and projects and priorities has hundreds of lines of tasks across, and it's important that everybody within the leadership team, all of our principals understand the focus of these tasks, what they mean to the system. But you have to be very thoughtful as you build these out, because if you're not thinking through all the different elements, then you may not realize that the different systems that are actually required to ensure success, budget and talent strategy have to come together if we're going to talk about transition plans. If they're not aligned and there's that shared understanding, we're not going to be successful. If it comes to academic vision and framework, and we're not allocating in the budget the funds required to make a change that we're committing to, then we're not going to be successful there. So if we don't detail the entire plan, we're never going to understand the complexities of what it's required to actually implement. And so for our board and for our community, this is precisely the same methodology we used and when we started the special education initiative, right? It's that type of effort, because that's what's required when you're taking on these kind of sorts of large initiatives. And so when I go to the next slide, it's just a Gantt chart to show you kind of what the work looks like. And for those at home, some of our trustees will have documents like this in their binder. But if you go to the next slide, what this shows is this is ultimately going to all kind of distill down into a representative graphic that we can share with our community, we can share with our board, as to where the large milestones are within each initiative and how they overlay kind of onto a calendar, so that our trustees know, during this period of time, these are the 3 things that are really ramping up or consuming significant resources, so that we're just mindful, right? We're aware. That is really the intention of this graphic. This is not the graphic itself. This is an example of what it will ultimately be as we refine the plans and progress. But I think it's really important. I would like our community and our board and our staff to see this is when the large milestones tied to board actions are. These are when the large deliverables are tied to the administration are. And we'll just lay those out over the course of the year. And again, you can't get to this level of kind of understanding until you do the detailed work within the project plans. So next steps, provide board and community updates, develop key performance indicators, KPIs. I am someone that truly believes in KPIs, but the true definition of them, I think sometimes KPIs are used in different ways and aren't truly performance indicators, they're just metrics. So we have lots of them that we track. My goal as we move forward over the next couple of weeks is to kind of lay out the ones that I'm recommending that I will be sharing with the board on an ongoing basis by way of board update or by way of superintendent's update, because there are lots of ones that I track that will never need to get to the board, right? I mean, they're like granular in nature, and there's lots of them. So that is what's going to be coming next. Manage priority timelines is part of our work, and then update board documents as appropriate. We use board notifications. We'll use superintendent's update, and we're going to just ensure that the important milestones and the KPIs that we're showing to track progress continue to be communicated, because it's important to know that there's a lot of work going, a lot of really great work, and if we're not talking about it and sharing, sometimes it could get lost, and that's not a good thing. So that is what I wanted to share regarding the overall effort. In your binders, you have different documents. The one that you'll have over each section is a list of tasks that identifies larger milestones tied to each project plan. In some cases, you do see the draft project plan. In some cases, you don't, because they're very, very dense. Like the 2022 bond program project plan is not in here because that would consume 1,000 pages, right? But the milestone schedule is. When you think about transition plans, right? The transition plans have an overall document, and then each one of the schools has its detailed document. So that is available, but it's not in this document. So we try to find the appropriate level of detail that can be consumed in a binder, provide the high-level update. And then when you think about an example of some of the deliverables or project documents for accountability, many of those are embedded within our turnaround plans. Well, those TAPs are kind of stand on their own. There are many of them. So just to insert those here would not necessarily be probably a good use of paper, since you've seen those and have them. But I wanted you to know that each of these has project plans behind them. But what you're seeing primarily are the higher level milestone schedules, but there's also a lot of detail in those as well. So I'm going to pause there before I hand it over to Katrina, our CFO, to take us through budget. This is really meant to be an orientation of the work. Y'all have all shared with me y'all's, I said, the board's identified district priorities. My objective here is to share with you that I think we've been aligned for a long time, because this work didn't happen overnight, right? We've been progressing this. But it's a commitment to share with you all how we're going to track that work over time, and then also create the space for feedback as appropriate. So what questions do you have? And then I'll hand over to Katrina. We're good on time for a couple minutes, but any thoughts, questions, comments? Trustee Singh? Oh, sorry, I called on you. I don't know, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hey, thank you.
We're pretty casual today.
I know. We're wearing jeans, see? That means we're casual. This is really good. I appreciate this, and I'm excited to know that you're going to be sharing with KPIs, because there are a few things that kind of stand out for me that I've been highlighting, and I'm like, I would like to know what the KPI is. So is there a way that we can share those with you, or have a conversation?
So what I was wanting to do, because every trustee, I think, is going to want to provide a different level of input. So my thought would be, you have the binder. Each trustee can spend as little or as much time as they would like. Mm-hmm. And then I'll create a timeline to just provide to me that feedback, just because some of these are very, very dense, and some of them maybe don't require a whole lot of feedback, and some of them probably require more.
Got it.
So I've talked to the team about what that's going to look like. It'll probably come in the next board notification, but if you want to redline something and send it along, I'm happy to do that. If there are questions specifically about which KPI we're using to track which thing or which task, that's probably a different level of conversation. But certainly I'm welcome to feedback. Okay. Because as I said before, my goal is to give to you a set of KPIs that I'm going to track to ensure the work gets done, and it's important that they align with kind of our board's expectations of what those KPIs could be. Okay. But I can't, if there's a KPI that needs to be created that doesn't currently exist, and I don't have a system collect it, that's also something I need to share with you.
Okay.
Right, is that helpful?
No, that is. Are we going to, President Boswell, are we going to have time tonight to actually have a conversation about what we're seeing in the work plans?
I think it is a good idea to make some space if we feel like we have time for it.
So is it for all the work plans or for
No,
one?
I mean, I just looked through a couple of pages, but there's a little so I wanted to see if we could take advantage of our time together, because I have some thoughts and I am curious to know what other, if my thoughts resonate with my colleagues, and if that seems like a good use of our time as well.
I think if it's higher level, like kind of approach
Higher
or
level.
strategy, then yes. I think if it's like, this task on this date,
No, no,
that
no.
there's a
Definitely
lot
higher
in here that
level.
are.
Definitely higher level.
And we haven't set time to go through, like, we're going to talk about the bond, we're going to talk about
Okay,
enrollment,
then
but we
that-
do
that'll
have
be a
time to
good
talk
time.
high level.
Okay.
No, we haven't set time aside to talk about each individual one.
Okay.
So I do think there's time for high level, and then we're gonna go
Okay.
deep into the budget and into the academic vision
Okay,
piece of it.
so
But the
then-
other one's high level, absolutely, I think.
Okay, and so that's for later in the conversation? Oh, it's right now?
Do you want to do it now?
Okay, so, and this is, again, I think this is awesome. This is this gives me such a good picture of all the intense work that's happening, so kudos to all the staff. I really appreciated the special education. I only got through like 4 pages of this, but the SPED stuff looked really good. And I liked the SPED stuff a lot because you gave me percentages. So it said like X percentage, cut the number of contractors by X dollars, make sure X percentage of ARDs are done within timeline, that kind of stuff. And so that gives me something beyond just do ARDs, it's like,
Sure.
okay, it's like a distinct output. And so there were a few places where I was like, I kind of wish we had like that level of granularity. And I'll just give some examples. But for example, we talk about, I guess on page 2, conduct an assessment of data analysis on the BOY and the MOY. And what I see here is like a list of things that the staff is going to do, but there's no way for me to be like, okay, so what, and it says things like, analyze the data and adjust instruction accordingly. But how do we know if that's been done well? Like that's the implementation fidelity and like measuring the outputs. And so like that's the kind of thing where I'm kind of like, And then there's a lot of reference in here to things like training for our teachers and staff. But how do we know that that training has been done well? So is there like a satisfaction survey or some kind of feedback that you're going to get from teachers to kind of close that loop all the way? So that's kind of how I think about KPIs, is not just here's our big to-do list, but here's how we know we've been successful in completing that list. So that's kind of like the overall theme.
Yeah, so I appreciate that comment. I think there's a balance because we're looking at a milestone schedule within a large effort, right? Mm-hmm. So professional development's a great example, right? So let's say we're gonna complete professional development for all elementary school teachers or educators, and we know that that's gonna take place. The model may be a trainer model where we do content intervention instructional coaches first, and then we roll that out. We have it over 3 months because you can't get all educators initially because there's only so many PD hours that we have. So we do surveys. We do collect that information. The question becomes, are we wanting to understand the number of educators that complete the professional development? Because that's a KPI based on just performance of completion. The other is satisfaction. And I think when it comes to satisfaction, I sometimes wonder about how much, bias there can or can't be in a survey that is just about, well, do you think it was good or not? Because there are things that we want to make sure are covered, and there's things and so I think that's a really good, really good comment. I just don't know that I could get down to level of granularity by subtask, create a KPI around that, because the KPI would be around PD in general. Right, and then we can share with you the data sets that we're using to drive the KPI, which would be some ratio, if it's truly a performance indicator. Because one thing we did with special education is we wanted to make sure that when it came to the modules, we had a percent complete, and we had to, it was 100% or nothing effectively. But over the course of month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, I could see, okay, we had 22% in month 1, based on where we are in this professional development day and what Dr. Cherry Lee has shared with me regarding her approach. I know that these 2 days in the 3rd week of February are going to yield a significant number of the staff because they've already allocated time in their professional development hours. So that number I expect to increase. So it goes from 22% to 76%. So then I got to cover 26% or 24% in the next 2 months.
Yeah, no, I
And so-
get, yeah, no,
but-
I get,
but that-
I'm just
that's
giving
how
you
it
the
gets, like,
overall
really-
theme. Yeah, and so, like, and there might be a simpler example too, like you have a lot of tasks in here around enrollment, but and maybe it's in here somewhere, but at the end of the day, we want to increase enrollment,
Yes.
and we need a target.
We have
Okay, but like, so that's the kind of thing that I'm like, I would expect would be a KPI of
so-
some sort.
So I wouldn't use that as a KPI would track progress on a task. That would be a goal, a percent of goal, like to meet. So like on the strategic plan, the text that's behind the schedule, that's one of the places where we set the target and then we say, okay, you know, like one example that we talked about was tours, right?
Yeah.
So we have implemented tours at our schools. It was something that we agreed to do. We worked with our principals to get it done. And so one of the things we track, how many tours have actually been completed, right? That to me, we have the denominator, we have a numerator, we can track progress over the period of time. When it comes to a goal, right, if we want to increase by X percent of students, you know, I forgot what the number is, like 4,000. You know, we're not going to know that number until the end, and I'm not going to be able to track, you know, like I would be kind of extrapolating on what I think that is along the way until I actually got there. So I would say I would want to know the KPIs that are likely to drive enrollment and kind of set those aside and then say this is our goal. And if we do these KPIs and these KPIs move, we would expect that target to be met. So we're thinking about it the same way. I just need to maybe share with you the KPIs that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Kind of have you all test them, stress test them and say, Matthias, this is a good number, but maybe I'm thinking about a target versus a KPI, just because
It could be, yeah. So I think that I'd love to hear from some of my colleagues, but you know, I know that we've talked previously about knowing, for example, how many students are enrolled by certain periods of time, you know, by certain dates and you know, things like that, or how many parents, you know, there's something in here about putting out a family engagement handbook, which is awesome, but there's nothing that tells me how many parents, especially how many parents of our economically disadvantaged students have accessed it, you know, and so like that's the piece where I kind of think of it, whether you call it a KPI or a target or a goal, like to me, it's just closing the loop to know that we've been successful.
Yeah.
So I don't know, am I the only one that's thinking that, or are other folks kind of, does that resonate with anybody, or?
That resonates. I mean, we need to build it and we need to be sure it is being used and it's working. Yes.
Yeah, I think so one of the things I struggle with sometimes is committing to something that we can't currently track yet. And so like the question I would have is, what system would I put in place to confirm that a student identified as economically disadvantaged has access to this, right? So right now, if it's in a portal, I'd have to place it in a portal where I have to figure out how to ensure that connection that I could build a data set from. And oftentimes when we talk about KPIs, the actual data set to build it up doesn't exist because the system doesn't yet exist. And so I always want to be mindful of what I can produce now, what I can produce as the system builds up. So there may be some that I think we could do now, and there's some that maybe I won't be able to build out until I actually have the system in place to collect the data. Like that's an example. Like there were, you know, so there's lots of them like that. That's the way that I think we have to think about it. But I agree with all the comments. It's just which one of those, because if we agree that this is the KPI that we absolutely need to do, and I agree with it, then we better build a system to be able to collect it. And that's going to come at an expense somewhere in the system. Perhaps it's technology, perhaps it's budget. And so that's the trade-off that I'm constantly thinking about, which is why you don't often hear me say yes immediately.
And I would say, to Trustee Singh's question and your point, like I have no interest in measuring things for the sake of measuring or creating complicated ways to measure. And I don't know if this handbook, I see the handbook listed, but it's, you know, a note. And so I don't know if the handbook is guidance for our campuses on authentically engaging families and expectations. I see a list of expectations of what you know, are thinking campuses will be expected to do. So I don't know who the handbook is for, if it's, you know, this is how we engage our families, or if it is for families about how you engage. But what are we going to see coming out of all of these things to show us that what you're doing, the plan you've put in place, is working? And I would rather see, for example, on our campus improvement plans a requirement on what you do with families in response to that handbook, and some measure of how you're, are you having events? Is your CAC fully staffed with families who are shared decision makers on your campus? Kind of what are those things that we know, and what are you doing to hold staff accountable for putting in place the things you create? That's my real interest, is making sure that we don't have something on paper that happens some places and not anywhere because we're not making it a priority in your systems.
Yeah, and I think that's the work. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think we need to be able to track the things that we have to track. We can't track everything. We don't have the resources to be able to pull that off. And so I think that's why so there's KPIs, there's goals. I need to track progress on the work, and there's also progress on the goal, and those are not always the same thing, right? Because the tasks independently drive the KPIs or the outcomes that will actually move, accountability or enrollment or whatever the thing is. So yeah, I think it's a great conversation. So I would encourage you all, if you have time, to just share those thoughts with me, and as we build up the KPIs, because I have KPIs. There's lots of them that I track, but I can't track them all the time. It would not work. Go ahead.
Well, so I guess before my comment, the question is this an actual living document that you're using, or is this a bespoke thing that you made for this meeting?
No, it's a living document.
Okay, great, I like that. So, considering if this is,
If you thought I could make this that quickly, I would think it would be fine.
yeah, I mean, it looked like a Jira schedule or something, so I assumed it was like a management software. But, I think what would be helpful for me is in differentiating these. Like, I like how it's color-coded and it's broken down. But I think to Trustee Singh's point is the difference between KPIs that are going to be milestones and the ones that are going to be objectives. Like in IEPs, that would be the way you would do it. So like if you're working on literacy level, you're working through milestones of increasing the literacy level. But if you're looking at maybe, organizational skills, you might have 3 or 4 objectives within that goal. And you say, okay, we need to accomplish all 4 of these things for the goal to be done. And that strikes me as similar to what you're saying on some of these. It's a clear, I need to hit one metric after another, and they build on each other. And others are, we need to accomplish these 5 tasks, and then that in itself. And then I think to the point that you were making is just achieving the initial goal, then you would hope you would see the downstream success after that. On something that would be a milestone-based one, like going back to literacy, like that's much more clear, whereas something that's objective-based, it's you put all the pieces together and it should be, okay, now it should function as a whole, but that's not always the case. Again, going back to an IEP, sometimes maybe you would achieve 3 or 4 objectives and you would have one lingering objective that just didn't get met, and you would reframe the goal around that one piece that didn't get met. Because you'd say, okay, why didn't this one skill or one task or whatever is an outlier. But I think looking at some of these, I could see the differentiation between some of them are just, we need to achieve these series of tasks and then we're considering the goal complete. That doesn't necessarily guarantee the success after the fact, right? It just means you've put in all the structure and you would hope that it would perform, where something that's more milestone based, you're going to see the general progress because you're increasing as the task is being accomplished, if that makes sense.
It does. I worry about how we're using milestone, KPI, goal, because they're very defined. And when I think about this level of work, and again, the bond program, the SPED work, this is something that is familiar, I think, to me and several of us that have been in these huge initiatives. When we think about a milestone, we're thinking about a point in time when a deliverable is accomplished, right? That is critical or on the critical path to meeting the overall objective, like getting to the board, for a policy change that's required for enrollment, right? If I don't get it at a certain point, that means that I can't modify our processes, which means I can't update the enrollment platform, which means that I can't actually enroll any student using that new approach, right? So that would be a milestone at a point in time. The technical tasks around updating the platform, those are going to be 60 different tasks that are all mainly within technology, and I need to make sure that I have each task identified so that when Oscar tells me, hey, I'm going to be able to hit this in time for you to be able to take the board policy, assuming it gets approved at this point, and then actually deliver the platform, those 60 tasks aren't going to have KPIs necessarily, right? It's going to be, coordinate with vendor, identify the budget, maybe, get a proposal for the additional cost of the modification, allocate the budget to it. If we have to go to a procurement process, like there are lots of tasks to actually just do that one subtask in enrollment. And then you think about the goal. Well, the goal is ultimately to drive enrollment up, and just getting the policy and the enrollment platform improved is one aspect of all of it, because there's the much more important part, the engagement part. There's the community, the retention part that we talk about, like, making our campuses more accessible. Those are all other tasks that are tied to enrollment goal moving up. I mean, the number of students enrolled going up. Now, so I think that's where I probably need to be better at clarifying how I'm defining a milestone, what KPIs I would use to measure progress in certain elements of the work, because you wouldn't apply it in all elements of the work. And then where we have goals, define them clearly and like, this is the goal, right? Just because I think that's what I struggle with when we have these types of conversations, is like how to get it all kind of moving.
I think like looking at what I'm assuming Dr. Lee created for the SPED milestones are really a great model to follow, because they are very different. I mean, for example, reduce contract spend by 60%. She didn't list all the steps she's going to take to do that. She just said, this is going to happen. And that's great, like for a trustee. Like, I don't care how you're, I don't want to have anything to do with getting into the weeds of that work. So like, I can see how it's useful for you to have every single task listed out of how it's going to happen, because obviously you're the superintendent. You've got to manage that enormous task. As trustees, I just want to know, how are you going to know you've been successful? Oh, okay, reduce contract spend by 60%. That is all I need to know. Likewise, like with, enrollment or whatever else it might be. I just need to know, like, top line, and maybe one way to limit it, because I also can feel the stress, like, oh my God, we're gonna have to build all these systems. No, it's not about doing that. But I think the board has identified a handful of priorities, and I think if we use that as our container, and spend some time over the next couple weeks kind of within that, saying, okay, what's most important for the goal, that like the most important outputs or whatever the measures that we can use as a heuristic to be like, okay, we're on track here for this stuff. I don't think it's going to be this huge thing. I think it's going to be very limited. Like, here's like a few things that are aligned with priorities we've already identified that we would like regular updates on. That's how I kind of envision it.
And I think that's how I would propose it. So that's why their KPIs and milestones aren't in. So we have the project plan, right? Mm-hmm. You saw, so Dr. Cherry Lee has probably the most robust, because it's had to be that for the last 3 years, and we've been building on it, right? So there's the larger plan, there's the strategic plan, and then you kind of distill down the milestones, which are shared here. And then the hope is, this just shows you the kind of larger task in sequence to drive all the work, but this is pulled out of a larger document and a larger planning effort. And then what should be on top of this are all the KPIs, right? So, we do have them all. I think it's important to do exactly what you said. Like, for these things that we agreed to, which are district priorities and initiatives between the administration and the board, these are the KPIs that we think most represent the work progressing the way that we expect, or that you expect of me and I expect of the system.
Absolutely.
Because then I can take that and then turn around and say, okay, the board said this, but that to me means these 20 things in this way, or 5 things. Is that helpful? So what I'll do is I'll work with the team to figure out kind of the space to create that feedback loop from you all. So if there's an area that you want to explore deeper, I can say, create some space, or just send them over to me. I'll create the mechanism for it, and then we can kind of progress the KPI for a bit. Again, we have a lot of them. It's just want to create that space for it.
That's great. Thank you. And I think we have one-to-one meetings with you where we can go deeper into things that we have interest in. And so I appreciate the chance to go deeper into whatever that may be. Good. Are we ready? We have time to go deep then into the budget and a little bit the academic vision, specifically listed here as theory of action. So are we ready to talk about the budget?
And so we have, we have 40 minutes allocated for the budget. I think we're probably a little bit tight, but we'll be okay. Max will pick us up. Quite that far.
Thank you. Hello, trustees. How's everyone doing today? I want to take a second to introduce my team. You know Adriana Cedillo, she's our Senior Executive Director, and then Jessica Hart is our Director of Budget. So you see me here all the time presenting, but these are the ladies that are spending numerous hours, and we're working together talking about the budget. So. The goal for today is for our budget workshop is to align the board on student-centered priorities and secure clear direction on budget strategies, recognizing that achieving a balanced / surplus budget now requires deliberate trade-offs that impact services and outcomes. So what we've talked about, what is a little bit different before, is we've talked about getting to a balanced budget, but now we need to start talking about contributing to our fund balance. So 4 of the actions we're going to do today is confirm and refine board guardrails, align on student outcomes and priorities. For FY 26-27, the information that you're going to see today is fiscal forecast. This is not preliminary budget. This is not the recommended budget. This is the information that I shared with you about a month ago. So we're still projecting off of that information. And then we want to provide direction on budget strategies. Thank you. So here are the guardrails that we discussed in August of 2024. Adriana and Jessica, we have like a little handout for you, but these are the guardrails that were set by the board in August of 2024. Ensure cuts in any area are equity driven. Consider the long-term impact of cuts and reductions. Ensure that teachers' voices have been heard in the decision. Center literacy, aligned to student outcomes, and listen to people impacted before cuts are final. And so these are the guardrails that we talked about. So we're going to spend a few minutes answering these 3 questions. We would like your feedback. 1, do these still reflect the priorities of the board? Are these still in alignment? Okay, I see some yeses and some nos. Any adjustments needed? And any considerations. So us 3 will be here to kind of walk through it, but we're going to give you a few minutes to just take some time to go through and make some adjustments. What this is going to help us do is make sure that we're planning the budget for 26-27 in accordance to how you see the priorities. And what I want us to remember here is that the way we spend our money truly shows our values. So we have to make sure that we're aligned with what our guardrails will be going into the planning for 26-27.
Well, I would say when it said like, teachers are heard, I think we have to be really specific when we say stuff like that. Like, do we hear you and then we are going a different direction, or are teachers being a part of the decision-making process in the budget? So that is what I would like to see, because I think we see that a lot when we say we engage people, we let people talk, but, whatever happens is going to happen. And then with equity-driven cuts, like, I don't know what that means in this district. Like, I've been here for 3 years in this position, and sometimes I feel like that means whatever is convenient for it to mean. So does that mean, like, yeah, I don't know, like, who's being impacted by the cuts, and is everyone, I mean, really, like, I want to see that everyone is getting what they need and acknowledging that some needs are greater than others.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to kind of piggyback on that, and I would say, potentially as opposed to just teachers, staff, because, you know, there's a lot of staff besides the teachers, I think. And then I think along the lines of being heard in the decision would be, I would say, incorporated in the decision. Not necessarily that we're going to do every single thing that they say, but that there is some effect from what they said demonstrably in whatever decisions we're making. And I would also kind of echo the element on equity, for us to find a way to define it more specifically for the task at hand, because there's lots of different types of equity, and equity, you know, based on the application looks very different. And so I think I think we should focus on what the intent of the equity is here, particularly given the circumstances that we're navigating. There's a lot of different ways that we could apply that equity lens, I think, and so being really intentional. Yeah.
I was just going to say, add on about centering literacy. I don't know if I would call, I mean, yes, literacy is hugely important, but are the other things that we've identified on our scorecard. So I would probably put something first that names our scorecard. You know, we spent so much time developing that and, you know, put so much thought into that. So I think the first thing is whatever we do helps to support the goals and that we've set out, the goals and the, what are the other things called? The constraints, yes. The goals and constraints laid out in our scorecard. I think that's probably my major feedback, but yeah.
Anyone else?
And so I would also, I think all of this is really difficult for me, because I think the district does a really, really good job of saying like, oh, we're doing it based on this, but it might not be the way that the board expected it to be done or want it to be done or what our community expects. So like even thinking about centering literacy, to some people that means curriculum, to some people that means there's an appropriate elementary child-teacher ratio in classes, or that the principal, who's an instructional expert, has enough clerks in the office so they have time to be in classrooms. So I just would like to see some more specificity, and it's almost April, and like I have no idea what's, you know, what cuts are coming down on our campuses.
Anything else? Yeah, I mean, I would echo that literacy alone is narrow. We know that we're struggling with numeracy. We know that we're preparing kids to go on to other things. And we know that we're in a moment when we're fighting to protect educational richness in our schools, right? We're fighting to protect a culture that's not just about testing, that is about so much more. We have fought as a community for strong arts programming, for, you know, a diversity of choices for our dual language programs, for all the ways we're preparing our students and really preparing our students very well for what comes next, as we're seeing. And I think we're seeing the literacy work, the numeracy work finally now take root. Not that isn't important. I think it's necessary but not sufficient. And so I think making sure that we're not defining things too narrowly onto, I think, the point to what does literacy mean? Does it mean map growth? Does it mean STAR testing? Does it mean learning to write effectively and getting the chance to read novels too? Like, what does it mean to us? And I think that really, our community has a lot of answers to that. Our educators, our families have a lot of answers to that. But really thinking about what we're trying to protect. And at the same time, the flip side of that is I think we have to acknowledge too that we have a lot of campuses and turnaround plans. We are having to direct a lot of resources that direction, and that's a budget impact as well. So.
I recall this exercise a year or so ago, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate sort of where we got to in that moment, and now almost can see it as like a second round, and so I really appreciate the comments I've heard up to this point, And what I hear, or what I heard was, with regards to, say, the last one first, listen to the people impacted before cuts are final. What I think I heard was an opportunity to change the word listen somehow to indicate whether it's a checklist, listening is a checklist, or indicate whether that is an insertion point where the insights derived or the insights heard get folded in. And not that it'd be guaranteed to be folded in, but a little more action orientation than listening sounds like an opportunity. So, when we listen to people impacted before cuts are final, what are we listening to hear? Are we listening to hear something where that's an opportunity to make a tweak? Especially, I think our community is getting stronger and stronger at being alternative minded, or like, here's another suggestion minded. We don't have a community that's saying, just don't do that. We have a community that's saying, you told us you were listening, so please don't do that, and here is a potential alternative. So does our system bake in listening to potential for alternatives? So that was with the fifth one. It kind of goes to number 3 too. Ensure that teachers' voices have been heard in the decision. Could that be something like incorporated, where our listening leads to listening for new possibilities? And then I heard people say, raise things around equity driven. Ensure cuts in any area are equity driven. Something that's been helpful for me, but I don't know that it's a shared notion, is to become increasingly, I guess granular is our new word that we like. And if we become increasingly granular in breaking things out and into, say, for instance, in this instance, wants and needs. And it's really tough because sometimes when we're talking about wants, we're actually talking about wanting things that feel basic and feel really important. But where we are in our budget is that we actually need to separate want from absolute need. And full acknowledgement of this is being really tough, because sometimes people want food that actually tastes good. And all I have money for is food that gets you nourished and it doesn't taste good. But I'm not in the space of wants at all. I'm in the space of needs, and I'm gonna make sure that food is nutritious, right? So if we ensure cuts in any area are equity driven, part of that means we've looked in and we've said, this is bare bones essential, we can't touch. This is a thing that's really, really good, and if at all possible, we're keeping it. This is something that's really good, and kids deserve it, and it's a want against these other things that are even more fundamental. So somehow in our guardrails, capturing that granularity of analysis and really positioning us, and I guess it makes your life a little bit easier if you can put back to us, here are these 3 things, and here is how they fit. Here's what bucket, or here are the 3 things. You board, tell us what bucket they fit into, kind of thing. So those were 3 things, but really just absolutely based upon what I've been hearing so far, and it's all stuff I agree with.
And I will say last year, for me specifically, I don't know if everyone else feels this way, it was really helpful to have the circles, the whole circles, half circles, and empty circles that tied back to our goals and our constraints. That was really valuable as we evaluated different options to see how it would directly impact the things that we had chosen to focus on most with our student outcomes.
I have one more thought on the 4th bullet point for centering literacy and considering the, successful work that we've done on the early childhood and the elementary literacy, if it wouldn't be more fruitful to say something like building upon or connecting back to literacy, like if we're already starting to see that success at the lower levels, how any of the other elements are tying back into that success so that we're expanding upon it. I think as we're particularly going through budget and guardrails and things, those items that are tying back into the literacy initiative or building upon it or using that as, you know, the foundational parts seem like we're getting, I would think, more benefit from them than maybe some of the bespoke stuff that doesn't connect as directly. So I think that's a different way to look at recentering, is using that more as a pillar that we're building upon.
Okay, thank you very much. So board sorry. So the next slide says budget processes and considerations. So when we're looking at the budget, thank you. When we're looking at the budget, we're going to look at it in a few different sections. So instructional priorities, maintain our core academic programs. That's kind of what we were just talking about, like what is important to us. Under student support and services, is it mental health and counseling and nursing? Is it special populations and intervention supports? Access to extracurricular and enrichment opportunities. That's another thing. Those are the items or questions that we would ask ourselves under student support and services. And then you have financial and operation. We always want to minimize disruption to our campuses. That's something that we take into consideration when looking at and planning the budget. Limit reductions to staffing where possible. We know how important our staff are, especially our staff at our campuses, and so we want to make sure that we're limiting the reductions or disruptions, maintain operational stability, and identify efficiencies and cost savings. So that's what we've been doing over the last few years, is identifying efficiencies and cost savings. All priorities will be evaluated within available resources and board-established guardrails. So that's what we just talked about, is that we have to make sure that what we want, what our priorities are, align with our funds that we have for the district. So here's an example. Matthias and I were talking the other day, and so we kind of talked about this slide. So this is just an example that we came up with. So this is an input, outputs, and then what are the outcomes? And so when we're looking at staffing, how do we improve upon staffing? We look at compensation. How are we compensating our staff? The benefits that we are providing for our staff. Are we giving our staff professional learning? And then their available leave. And so if we do all of these inputs well, then the output should be a decrease in teacher vacancies, right? And we should have a decrease in substitutes. And we all know why that's important, because we need qualified teachers in the front of our kids, and we want them to be there every day or as much as possible, not being out a lot. So the student outcome will be an increase in teacher retention and an increase in student achievement and academic growth. So this is just one of the examples of how we're going to look at what is what is the input, the output, and the outcome. Not just saying this is a way that we can save $20 million. What is the input, saving, what is the output, and then how does the outcome impact our students?
Yeah, and I this is an important example because I think it just shows the complexity of how many things contribute to an outcome moving. It's not just one thing, and we talk about this all the time. It's not, the teacher in the classroom is one of the, if not the most important thing, but there are lots of other things as well that we all have to ensure, are supported in our resource if we're actually going to be able to do what we need to do our way. And so when you think about this example, multiply that by 100 other examples in Austin ISD, and the reason that I wanted to share this is because sometimes we get into this weird habit of looking backwards and saying, okay, well, this many years ago, we had this many employees and we had this many, this was our total cost. And I think, well, yeah, that's true, but we also had lots of vacancies. And we know at that time, vacancies really harmed our ability to support our students. And so I think context matters, the full story matters. And so I think when we showed this relationship, it's clearly, it's easy for us to show everybody how multiple things impact the entire system. And when you look at that list, right, compensation was a big part of it. That's a huge, element of our budget. Benefits, huge element of our budget. Professional development, other large items. These are huge items. So impacting any one of those, we can't tell you precisely what impact it's going to have on the outcome, but we know that it will have an impact, right? And so that is the balance that we're trying to to kind of strike here as we talk about budget adjustments moving forward. So as we move forward and look at different considerations for reductions, we're going to show it in this way. So you can always understand how it's ultimately going to impact outcomes. And I think that coupled with a measle chart that shows how the cut impacts the scorecard, that's what it's called. So they,
You might need a new name.
yeah, it's been that for, I don't know, since the 50s or something. So we'll call it something different. I don't know. So anyway, I just thank you for sharing that, Katrina. I think it's a good example, and we'll have more like that as we move forward and talk about actual reductions.
So the next slide is our assumptions that we used, and we've looked over this, but I want to spend a little bit more time on this today. You can see 23-24, our budget, the numbers that we used in our assumptions to plan the budget for 23-24, 24-25, and then let's look at 25-26. So the enrollment that we planned for 25-26, which was last fiscal year, or this fiscal year, was 72,303. We planned with a 2% vacancy savings, and our average daily attendance would be at 64,100. And at snapshot, which is in October, our enrollment numbers were 69,207. So that's roughly like a 4% decrease. And our average daily attendance is 62,522. So what we've talked about, and Victoria is here to help us kind of talk about the enrollment projections. The enrollment projection is pretty much a flat, or 69,550, that's the projection. And so what we want to do when we're planning the budget is we want to be as conservative as possible, because losing 4% of enrollment this year has impacted us, right? It's increased our deficit, which we know. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our teacher staffing on what the projected enrollment numbers are. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, how Victoria is going to continuously give us updated numbers. We're meeting with Talent Strategy, Denisha and her team, to continuously tweak those numbers so that when we get to the budget, this is really what we feel that we're going to be at. For now, we're saying that we're gonna reduce in budget, in finance, the adjusted enrollment will be the 66,768. Our vacancy savings, we're still going to do a 2%. And then our average daily attendances, we're going to say it'll be at 60,314. So what this is doing is this is providing us a cushion so that when we get to the end of when we get to next fiscal year, if our enrollment decreases and our average daily attendance decreases, it won't be a complete shock to the system. So we're trying to make sure that we're planning ahead for our teachers. Our principals are able to staff our campuses appropriately, but that it also is not a large impact if the numbers fluctuate for the budget. The last column I want to talk about here today is the property value change. So in 25-26, we were told that the property values would decrease 2%. They ended up decreasing 4%. So again, that's another item that decreased or increased our deficit. So we're being told by Leanna, which is our chief appraiser, that the range is between 3% and 5%. We meet with her tomorrow. We meet with her tomorrow to go over preliminary numbers, but right now we're doing the 5% projection, because what we've done in the past, she said 2 to 4, we kind of did average, and we continuously, it's just one more thing that we have to tweak. So when we talk about why the deficit increased, this is some of the reasons why. So we have to continuously do better at planning and budgeting year over year.
Can you speak a bit? Oh,
no, yes.
Okay. What again is the adjusted enrollment?
So the adjusted enrollment is how we're going to plan the rest of the budget outside of staffing for teachers at the campus. So we're going to give, Denisha and her team are going to provide staffing for teachers on the 69,550, but everything else on the budget is going to be on the lower number, the 4%, so that we can have a cushion there.
Got it. And I didn't catch that the first time, and that is a really appreciated nuance. So in other words, we're protecting our kind of ratios and, quite frankly, our staff by going with this larger number and anticipating a larger number. But we're also, the hedging is to go assume a lower number for every other aspect of our functioning. And there's a kind of quiet acknowledgement, if we go one layer deeper, that's still not that much wiggle room because the staffing is 87, 88% of the budget. So even as you make that really nice nuanced move, you're talking about now it's the 13% side where we're playing more conservatively. So it's the best we can do, but it's not as huge a dollar savings as one might imagine. Yeah.
Right, right. And so we want to make sure that when we want to be as precise as possible, which is very hard, but we also as a district have to stop finding ourselves in the spot where we pass a budget, and this is really what we think the numbers are at the moment, right? And then we get hit with a larger property value.
Can we hold that slide, that the last graphic or the last? And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but as we were speaking, I would like that slide to be up.
There, no, 14. 14. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll keep over you.
Oh, okay. So
Did I
we
cut you
have
off?
to,
Yeah.
because what happens is, you guys know, it is very hard to say, these are our strategies. We're going to come in at 19 million. We feel good about this budget because we're not coming in here passing a budget that we're not in agreement with. But then you have all these things that continue to happen that make the deficit larger. So we need to start budgeting differently. And one of the ways is to say that if we're looking at enrollment, we're looking at staffing allocations, we're looking at all of these things. We're talking to Carla about average daily attendance, how to do all of these things, taking maybe the larger projection for a property value decline than we've done in the past, because that gives us a cushion so that hopefully my 66,768 number is way too low. Right? But Matthias and I talked about it. If it goes up to 67, great. If it goes up to 68, great. But we've had a cushion there, and we've also kind of insulated our staff at our campuses. We didn't bring our campuses down to the 66,000 for staffing.
So I want to be like super honest here. And I asked you last time we talked budget, are we talking about a permanent contraction, or are we talking about a flux where things are going to go up and down? There are two numbers there that scare me a lot. And one is around attendance, and one is around property values. So to speak to attendance first, and I'm pretty sure the answer is probably going to be yes, but are we looking at, as a for instance, our immigrant and new immigrant population and likelihood of variations that could in fact be quite dramatic and have quite dramatic impacts, so that I wonder if 66 is a conservative enough number, and likewise other things impacting enrollment. We've all been paying attention to vouchers, and many folks have sort of predicted vouchers wouldn't have quite as much of an impact as one might imagine. Really, it's just a tax break for people already enrolled in the voucher program, or already enrolled in private schools. And I think early numbers are sort of bearing that out, but there still is an impact. So when we go, well, here's the legislation, what's the potential impact of this legislation? Here's immigration, what's the potential impact of federal immigration policy? And then whatever, number 3, number 4. So I'm asking about enrollment. Then the second thing, historically, I'm sorry to ask this, but what are the largest property value drops that we've seen? Great Depression, 80s, 2008, and is 5% the right number in terms of how bad it could get? And I guess the final thing, the stopgap, is like, at what point are we done? At what point can we not absorb a 12% drop? That's unheard of. That's never happened. And then it happened. Can we absorb it? 62,000 in 1 year? That's unheard of. Well, it just happened. Can we absorb it? So I'm really kind of worried about those two numbers, and I'm worried about a frank consideration of worst case scenarios.
Hi, everyone. Victoria O'Neill, Executive Director of Campus and Family Engagement. One thing to note about the average daily attendance is that the percentage is actually increasing. So more of our kids are coming to school every day, which is super positive. And when the number is like used for budgeting, that is a proportional reflection of the decline in total enrollment, right? So I think that that's something important to note there. And then when we think about the total enrollment projection, the 69,500 is our students that are counted in ADA. When I have made that projection, it is the students attending our schools, right? So we have students that are counted in some of the enrollment counts that are non-funded students. People, for example, if they are in the early referral center, that's more of a bureaucratic thing where they're not actually enrolled on a campus and attending and being counted for attendance, and therefore we're being funded. So there's always a little bit of movement, and like each of the metrics is calculated in different ways. So I think that in terms of the impact of the budget, I think that Chief Montgomery is being very mindful about those worst case scenarios and stepping back and doing the planning at a really conservative point. And if we can, and if we are able to achieve the goals that we have in terms of increased enrollment, then those resources, of course, will be put right back into the system.
And I want to, just before we move on, we're at about 30 minutes into this conversation, 40 minutes allocated, and this is really important. We can choose, and we started late because we discussed other things, which I were also important. So do we want to reduce our time talking about the theory of action a little bit, stick with this, go a little longer? Where are we? I just want to do a time check with everyone.
I think we need to devote the full time allocated for the academic vision. I think we need to make sure we have time for that.
Okay. So do we want to try to wrap this up in 10? Do we want to go a little long?
I would like to stick to the original schedule, personally. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Trustee Singh.
Can we put that slide back up? Okay. So I think I thought about one of the guardrails, which is no surprises. Okay, and budget extremely conservatively, because that has burned us the last couple of years. And I also want to be sure that we spend time today talking about how we're projecting to end this year compared to the budget we approved last June. I think it's really important for the public to see if we're off or if we're not. But when we talked during our one-on-one about this, Matthias, we had talked about showing the math of how we get this 69,550, because, just doing a simple, quick regression analysis shows that number should be closer to 65,000 rather than 69,000. So I'm not quite sure.
You haven't let us go to the next two slides.
Okay, so maybe you've done that.
Well,
Okay.
the methodology.
Okay, but like in a nutshell, why are we predicting more students? I know that ADA is predicted to be lower, but why are we predicting higher enrollment when we've got all this other stuff going
on? Did you want to jump to the methodology slide? I think it's 17 maybe. Thank you. So the way that we did the projection methodology this year, there we go. Okay, is for the continuing grade levels on every campus. So K to 4 was basically like that number was rolled into 1st through 5th. So if there were 50 kids in kinder, it was projected for that school to have 50 kids in 1st grade. There is quite a bit of mobility in Austin ISD, but as a starting point, most of our campuses at those points, there's not a whole lot of net gain or loss at that point. Similarly with 6th and 7th rolling into 7, 8, and then 9 through 11 rolling up to 10 through 12. Then for the entry grades at each band for pre-K, K, 6, and 9, we used a 4-year snapshot average. So took a 4-year average of those class sizes at the snapshot date for each campus and the grade levels that they had. Then the adjustments have been made on an ongoing basis. So initially, the students that are attending closing campuses were added proportionally to the receiving campuses. So for example, if they had an incoming average class size of 100 at the receiving campus and 100 at the at a closing campus, and it was like 50-50, so then it would be 150, right? Then the projections were adjusted with the actual outcomes from the transition enrollment round. So at the outcome of that, for example, we knew how many students had been actually granted seats at Covington, for example. And so the projections were adjusted with that. And again, literally this week, we looked at the number of students with confirmed registrations in the system up through yesterday. And any campus where their number of confirmed registrations had already exceeded their projection, I went ahead and adjusted that projection to make sure that we are staffing appropriately. Campuses that have not yet met their projection, I didn't move them downwards at this point, but we are watching those metrics. We've got about 37,000 students confirmed at the moment.
Can you go back to one more slide in front of this slide and then speak to that? Because both of these slides have to be talked about together.
Sure. So we looked at some 3-year trends of the enrollment picture overall for the district, right? Like each campus, each grade level, and picked out just a couple of very high level messages. And these messages have also been part of informing the enrollment strategic plan and the actions and tactics that we are moving forward. So we see that certain elementary campuses have demonstrated consistent enrollment increases. We do see that the transition from 8th to 9th grade is an interesting point. The 9th grade cohort consistently exceeds the size of the previous year's 8th grade cohort. When I kind of quizzed the principals at the last principal meeting, it was just about 500 brand new 9th graders were coming into the system at that point, right before the break. The transition from 5th to 6th grade is an opportunity that we are working across departments to address, and that is where the 6th grade class is lower than the 5th grade class that came before it. And we have seen and are working through some understanding of the broader social trends and things in the city and things internal to Austin that comprehensive high schools have seen multi-year enrollment decreases.
Multi-year enrollment
decreases.
Well, adhering to what folks are talking about moving forward, for me, I'm just not feeling optimistic. Well, I'm hearing a lot of really great initiatives, granular work to say, well, what's happening between 8 and 9, what's happening between 5 and 6, and a lot of concerted efforts. And I think so many of these things are bigger things than us and bigger than our systems. They're tsunamis, and we're like, how can we shore up the dam? And it's a tsunami. So, to Trustee Singh's point about the conservatism, I am 150% there on the conservatism when it comes to the budgeting, which is going to mean hard work for us, but I'm kind of freaked out. And don't have to do it now, and I guess I'll ask for an additional briefing on the real estate side of it. But I don't understand how we are not giving it 50-50 that the floor is going to fall out of our real estate market. I mean, I don't know a better way to say it. And how big does it, I'm not an economist. I'm not any of that stuff that would have an expertise. I guess I could go and look it up pretty quickly. But what are the largest drops in real estate in a single year? and what are the likelihoods of it happening again? And then from there, what's the impact? So I would love to get more information on the real estate projection side, and would love for very conservative budgeting, honestly.
So I do want to address really quickly a conservative budget. So we have been budgeting conservatively. I don't want us to walk out of here thinking that we have not, right? So we have, but I also want to say that it is a balancing act, because one of the things Matthias and I talk about, if we balance too conservatively and we cut too much, then how does that impact our schools? And it's harmful to the system. So so when we say no surprises, that's not possible. We just have to figure it out year over year over year. Yes, thank you. Yeah, like no, yeah. So we just need to figure out how do we do that we can continuously be as conservative as possible, and it's going to be year over year. We're going to have to get tighter. So like this year, we're not going with the middle of the stream of the property value decline. We're going with the 5%. That is one of the ways. But what's going to happen is that means we're going to have to reduce more this year. So those are the things that we're going to have to continuously talk about and work through. And it is going to mean deeper reductions, deeper cuts, because we're being ultra conservative now.
Thank you. So
Just
your
really-
question, and then anything else that you really, really need from us before we move on. So let's hear, yeah.
Just really quickly, I would maybe slightly reframe it when we're talking about the conservatism or worst case scenarios. What I would like to hear is what is the next contingency, and then the next contingency, and the next contingency. For me, as an example, I would say staffing is, the most critical last thing that we can cut. And particularly on the campuses, that's the thing that's getting the families to come back, is the staff that's on those campuses. And so worst case scenarios aside, if we're 10 million short here, or if we're 15 million short there, I would hope to see, it doesn't have to necessarily be a menu, but like, what are the options we have? So, I can be looking at which red button do we need to hit that is going to save the staffing if it comes down to it. To me, that's worst case scenario, is we got to cut and cut and cut, and we're not scrambling, so to speak, for one more idea, that we at least have some choices, even if they're not the most palatable or the ones that we'd want. I know that it's protecting our, the bottom line over here.
I really like that. Thank you for that.
So what else do you need from us? I don't know what else you have and what else you want to run through with us, but I'd love to make sure that we're answering what you need answered before we move on.
There's really not anything else that I need, but we can skip. Dr. Valles, can you go to slide 20?
And all of these are in board docs.
Yes.
For
And then
everyone.
Ms. Montgomery, would you like us to go around and just kind of quickly tell you like our priorities and what we want to protect? And I would say I'm also going to piggyback off of Trustee De Urioste, as the financial professional here, it's like when people say like, oh, this did not happen because of anything that Austin ISD did. Austin ISD is doing an excellent job with the resources that we are given and with the constant chaos that's caused by the state and by the economy that we don't control. And you can look at a family and say that they are irresponsible because they are dipping into their savings to buy their kids groceries, or you could say that they are being responsible and not being negligent towards children. And that is what this administration has done. And so that's, I'm always gonna like push back on that, because I know how hard we work to be very financially responsible. So I like, instead of looking at every worst case scenario that could happen, is what are our priorities? So I'm gonna tell you mine. And my priorities are our campuses being optimally staffed, optimally functional to take care of kids day one. So like I love that, our staff from central office has gone down to Dobie and Webb and Burnett to help. Those need to be our priorities day one. That could have, would have, should have happened day one, not just when STAR test scores are coming out. So I want that to be priority, that each and every campus is supported. There are students who need extra support at every single campus. There are students experiencing poverty at every single campus. And that's always going to be what I want to see. If there are any cuts to campuses, like, so I don't even want to hear the word overstaffed at campuses, because there are no campuses that are overstaffed. When my mom taught kindergarten in the 70s, every kindergarten class had an aide. That's just developmentally appropriate. That's how many staff members you need. But that now sounds like a luxury at this point, right? When that's something that would really, really benefit kids. So I think not saying that that schools are overstaffed when our staff members are probably even our kids wouldn't agree with that. So thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else has priorities to share, we can. And I also want to be sure if there's anything that you think is essential to show us that we also.
Yes, I would like to talk about this one slide because I think this is something we need to look at for 26, 27 when we're planning, and then that will also then give you we'll give you an opportunity to talk about, to answer the final question. So for 26, 27, when we presented it before, our revenue, which is the slide before, but our revenues less our recapture, less our operating expenditures is $166 million over. So we're spending projected, or per the fiscal forecast for next year, is $166 million. And what we're committed to doing this next year is contributing back to the fund balance, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to stay at 15% and then next year get to the 20%. So you'd have to cover 5% in 1 year, right? And so the target for 26, 27 is $171 million. That's the target of reductions needed for fiscal year 26, 27.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just so people know, like, this is reduction after years, after year, after year of reduction. Yeah. Being squeezed, and as Trustee Lucio said, not just us. Yeah.
Right, not just us.
Really, really important to know that, and it's our job to do the best we can with what we have.
So what we wanted to accomplish here today is to show you some strategies that we've already been talking about of how to reduce the $171 million. So in property monetizations, you have 3 properties there for a total of $56 million. The one part that I do want to talk about is we don't want the property to just continuously bail us out for 1 year. So if we sell 3 properties for a total of $56 million, those are properties that we no longer have if we monetize them, but we don't want to use that to bridge the gap for that year. Right? So what we've been doing a really good job at is we've been doing a really good job at reducing our spend, but not reducing the budget. Okay, and so then for departments, we have a $22 million amount here, which is $20 million worth of department vacancy collapses. And then remember how we did the property insurance last year. So we saved $3 million on our property insurance last year by having higher deductibles. We're going to talk about doing that again this year for a total of $2 million. And one of the things we've said every single time I've come in the front of you is we don't want to impact campuses. So this year, for this fiscal year, is the first time we impacted campuses for non-staffing. So when enrollment numbers decrease, year over year, we've never impacted campuses. So this is the first year. But now we're starting to say that even with us saying that we're going to strategically reduce campuses by $17 million, we still have an additional $76 million worth of reductions that need to be made to the budget.
And so how quickly are we going to get detail? That campus bucket is big and vague. And how soon? I think our community really wants to know. Our campuses need to know. We need to know. I think we're starting to hear from community partners, from kind of out there in the world. How quickly are we going to have a public conversation about what that looks like and where our priorities are? Because I think that is pretty urgent.
Yes, so some of the reductions that we have here are staffing allocations, and then some of them are changing our planning periods. So we're needing to figure out how do we impact the campuses as least as possible. But what I also want us to be clear is that go ahead.
I think she's asking about when we're going to come back with clarity around the reductions. So we have the board ad hoc committee. You met with them last night. You're meeting with them again. So I think the question is, when does that list of items, right, kind of organized in a way, to Trustee Dioris's point, comes back to the board, so that we can say, okay, these are the things that we've evaluated based on the feedback from this work session, and so I think that's when will we come back for that part
Yeah,
of the
thank you. I would say that we could come back in April. So we've added another, and we have a couple of our ad hoc members here today, which is, we appreciate them being here, but we've added another session with them because we wanted to come talk to you first. And then we're gonna have another session with the ad hoc where we're talking about each specific item. And that meeting is April 6th, so probably the information session after that, we can come back.
Thank you.
And what we can do, trustees, is either create a space like this after the meeting, depending on how heavy that meeting is. I do think this type of conversation is appropriate for the budget because there's a lot of dialogue back and forth that's helpful to us. So I'll work with Katrina, but it'll be shortly after the board ad hoc committee, but no later than the board information meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and we're happy to have a conversation that is helpful, so thank you all for all of that. Okay, do you feel like you have some information to go forward?
I think if anybody else has priorities they want to throw out there, that would be helpful. Sorry, Trustee Singh.
I like what Trustee Whitley-Chu said, so second that. But I would say, I thought we were going to get a clear statement on how far we are from our budget, or is that happening
So
on
that's
Thursday?
Thursday.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
26, 27, and then 25, 26.
Got it. I would say I would be interested in understanding better what, if we're going to make changes to that 2-mile radius for bus transportation. That's just something I've always, I like to keep an eye on.
So I think I'm curious in regards to the last slide and how we're looking at addressing those fund imbalances, if it's worth putting more explicitly some goals around trying to raise money from outside the district, whether it's, community, and even just a modest one. I think in line with what I feel I've been saying about the property development, that's a model that if we're going to keep using it, we need to have a functional process around it that the community, that is successful with the community. I think fundraising would be a similar one, whether it's, private partnerships, third party, even just a modest goal to start that initiative, because I think to the conversations that we've been having tonight, if things get worse financially, whether, for any one of a myriad of reasons, that is a tool that the community's been asking us to engage with for quite some time. I don't think we need to set a huge goal like we're going to raise $50 million, but just having something more explicit with the idea that if we can find a process around that is functional, that we can expand upon. So even if we just set a goal the same way, you don't always meet the targets on how much the cuts are going to be. I don't expect it to magically meet the target on fundraising, but something around that I think would be helpful.
So, Trustee Diorio, when you talk about fundraising, I heard you reference things that were tied to revenue generation, but not explicit to fundraising. And so I think that it would be appropriate to set perhaps a revenue generation goal, because there are things that we've done that have generated revenue, and there are things that we've done over the last year and a half that haven't quite come back to the full board regarding, different strategies, including naming rights, including, we've done lots of things. So I think a goal for that would be appropriate. As far as fundraising, perhaps it's a separate conversation, and maybe you have two goals, because one we control entirely, the other would require, a different level of support. But I do agree, maybe a modest goal would be appropriate. And there are things already that we could actually show as contributing to that goal.
Yeah, and again, I think just starting that as a more explicit consideration that we can build upon as we need it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Appreciate it.
I have written feedback in my handouts.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Katrina. All right, we'll now segue to Dr. Marianne Maxwell to take us through a conversation regarding theory of action for our academic vision and framework. As a reminder to our community and to our staff and certainly our trustees, this is a commitment. It's a strategic effort. It's one that hasn't been completed within the district in quite some time. It's incredibly important that we do this work so that we understand how we're going to support our students and how we're going to ensure that the how is incorporated into everything that we do. And so this is an important first step. There are lots of steps along the way. Much of that is detailed in the plan, and we'll provide more documents around it. But for this specific first part, I'll have Dr. Mary Ann Maxwell kind of take us through the work and the conversation. Can you get that? If not, I can get it.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And so we will go through a few slides just to set some of the basics and foundational understanding and make sure we're all on the same page with terminology. But really, most of the rest of the time is going to be you all having an opportunity to have some discussion, sharing one at a time, also having some discussions with each other, coming to consensus for a few things, and then starting to build a theory of action for teaching and learning. So that's really what tonight is focused on. We won't walk away with a draft for theory of action theory of action for teaching and learning, but we will walk away with all of the components that we need to then develop a draft together and then continue to come back to all of you, to community, to staff, to get feedback so that we can continue to iterate that draft until we have final vision, a version of theory of action for teaching and learning that we would be able to submit for board approval. Okay, so, well, we started with our vision that we've been talking a lot about lately, which is really making sure that Austin ISD has excellent neighborhood schools and that each school is vibrant and well-resourced and meets the needs of every child. And really the basis of that is talking about teaching and learning and the foundations for our academic work. So we've talked too about the academic framework and some of the components that go into that. Really, this is just a cohesive instructional roadmap that ties together curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional learning, and program alignment across all of our schools. And then we've discussed some of the critical components of that before as well. This was all in a release of the academic framework, critical components, and some initial vision and drafting around that we released in the fall of 2025. So those four main components have to do with curriculum and instruction, assessments, professional learning communities, and professional learning. So those are the main areas that we've looked at, really building up and improving so that we do have strong neighborhood schools everywhere in the district. These are individual components, but they all should work very closely together. And curriculum instruction, it seems like one small component, but everything involved with curriculum instruction has to do with what teachers have in their hands every day, how we're delivering instruction, but also all of the programming that we have across the district and what all of our schools have in all kinds of our programs, whether that's happening during the day, whether we're talking about courses, whether we're talking about after-school programs and other programs that we have available to our students, fine arts and athletics and everything. So just want to set that we're not just talking about math and reading, not that we don't think those are important, but that we're not just talking about that when we're talking about curriculum and instruction. Another big piece is assessments. That's that longer term work of really building an assessment framework that works for Austin ISD, that is meaningful, that allows us to spend the time really talking about assessments and what they mean to us and what they mean to our students and our families. Professional learning communities, which we've talked a little bit previously in the latest board meetings about the work that we're doing there, which is really just the venue for collaboration on campuses to get a lot of this work done. And then professional learning. So how we're continuing to invest in our system and build up a system of building our teachers, building our instructional leaders, and building ourselves as district leaders so that we are learning together and that we are growing together. And that takes a strong professional learning system. The initial piece of all of that, though, starts with the work that we're doing tonight with academic visioning and building a theory of action for teaching and learning. That exists in our policy. That's actually AE local. It's been a few years since we looked extensively at that policy. I think there have been some adjustments made to it. But in light of what we talked about tonight and what we know we've been focusing on lately with our district priorities and where we need to focus and have some improvements, that theory of action for teaching and learning could really use a good look and some good, strong discussion and some suggestions for how we might build one that really works for us now. So some of the development here, this is just a very high-level overview of how this theory of action is going to be developed, starting tonight with the board workshop to really develop some guiding statements for that theory of action. And then leaving tonight, we'll go back, administration and board members will work together to really synthesize what we've talked about in this work session and develop that theory of action. Next step is to engage with ourselves again, board, staff, and community to get feedback on that proposed theory of action. So a similar process that we're going through tonight, we'll go through a version of that with multiple groups, talking about how we got to where we are with the current draft and asking for additional feedback and additional considerations in that draft. And then we would go into review that feedback that we've been collecting and then engage in final, Matthias used the word stress testing earlier. We're going to use it again tonight here, stress testing that theory of action and then refining it and then submitting for board approval so we can codify that in Austin ISD policy. Okay. Are there any questions about that process? We'll go into a little bit more detail after we do tonight, but are there any questions about that process before we head out into some foundational discussions?
I just have one, which to me, there seems to be a feedback piece missing, where for us to create one and then get feedback, rather than getting feedback, using that to create one and then getting feedback. It seems like hearing from the people closest to the work and the families who choose our schools and the students in our schools would be valuable to me. I mean, I can speak with what I know of our community, what, we've heard and other ways of gathering feedback, but it feels top down to me.
So I think that if we maybe go through the exercises tonight and then can talk about tweaking, the exercises tonight won't draft the theory of action. It'll just come up with some of the guidelines, some of the foundations for the theory of action. I know you all have done in some work groups together looking at if-then statements, right? So that's what we'd be looking at tonight. And we'd go through the similar process with community and with staff. We could, one of our last questions here is, what else would you like to see in this process? And so this is a process just that we're proposing tonight. It definitely is here for your feedback. And so it could be that we go through this session and then we go through very similar sessions with community and staff and gather all of that feedback before we start that first draft. Is that what you're thinking or suggesting there? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll take feedback and make adjustments. I think President Boswell, one of the things when we that I certainly recognize is that you all, as representatives from the community, have lots of great insight. And to start a process, we have to start. And I think what I have found, and just the work that I've done over the last 8 years, is when we have these conversations with community, it's really helpful to be able to share different aspects. So I think this approach will work. I feel confident in it. We want to engage with the community, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that at the end of the day, it's going to be codified in board policy, and we need to figure out a way to capture the community voice and have our community respond to things. And so we think this will yield ultimately the product that we need to get the work done in the time that we have identified. But again, we're happy to make adjustments in timeline if needed, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions before we start?
I think just one clarification is that the theory of action is one aspect. I know Dr. Maxwell hit this. This is one piece. It is like one section of this larger effort. So I don't want our trustees to leave and think that this is it. There will be a lot of work over the next 18 months. So this is just one component of it. So get ready.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say at least 18 months too. And definitely not the only place that we have identified for lots of sessions for community feedback either. So when we get further into defining what we're doing with our schools and programs and how we're seeing programs across schools, but also programs within schools and offerings that we have, that is a huge community piece as well, because I know there's a lot of good feedback, and I just don't think we could even get through the process without engaging community and staff in that process as well. Okay. Okay, so basics, what is a theory of action? So this is an if-then statement. If we do A and B and C, or just A and B, then we expect X to happen. So around the if portion of this statement, it's basically, here's what we're going to try and do. These are the actions that we'll be taking. Around the then, here's what we expect to happen as a result. So in other words, while the if part of the statement describes the actions or strategies being implemented, the then part describes specific observable changes that indicate success. So we would want to have some then statements that really help us identify and measure what we want to see ultimately in our students and in our student outcomes. That would be something we could measure or identify in some sort of way. And I don't necessarily mean measure by an assessment. There are lots of ways to measure things, but as long as we believe that this could be a measurable outcome, then it would really help strengthen that then portion of the statement. So I have some folders here that I'm going to pass out, and then we actually have some slides on this too. These are 3 sample theories of action. So one is drawn from an existing district, and I believe that you have seen this first one before, and then there's 2 other examples. I'll actually show them. Oh, thank you, Josh. I'll actually show them on the slides here, and then we're just going to give a few minutes to look through these sample theories of action and talk through, have a discussion around what you see as the similarities of these different samples. What are the differences? What makes if and then statements either easy or difficult to operationalize? That's a really important piece because we do have to, these are actions that we take, and we do have to be able to operationalize the if part of this theory of action so that we can get to the then part that we can measure. And then also, this is not an there are only 3 samples here. There are, tons of samples as theories of actions, and this is not, they don't exactly necessarily encompass everything that we might want to see. But they do have some things to think about. They're structured a little bit differently. So this first one has I think it uses specific language. It talks about the art of teaching and learning. It also has a graphic on the side, and some theories of action do this in separate parts there. It actually talks about specific inputs for that make it actually actionable, and then talks about what the district would be investing in so that, and it has a broader then statement talking about our students graduating as critical thinking global citizens. And the next couple ones are focused a little more on specific areas of focus. So this one would be focused more on curriculum instruction. This definitely could be a piece of a theory of action instead of a whole one. And then, so the idea here is to improve academic rigor. So if we provide high quality standards aligned curriculum and targeted coaching and collaborative planning time, then teachers will deliver rigorous, consistent instruction, which will result in increased academic proficiency and closing opportunity gaps for all students. This next one is built the same way, but it focuses on the whole child. It focuses on MTS and really identifying needs of every child, and some of those actions in the if part, and then getting to the outcomes in the then statements for some things that we see, but also some measurable results. And so I'll give you a few minutes to read over those handouts, and then everyone has a chance to read them, then we can have let me know when we're ready to open it up for discussion. All right, any thoughts on similarities or differences that stand out to anyone?
I mean, just three big differences. The first one is the only one that mentions caretakers in the home. The second one is extremely like top-down. If we tell them what to do and they do it, kids will learn. And the third is the only one I see that really incorporates, cultural responsiveness.
You're asking for similarities?
Yeah, just any similarities or differences that stand out to you, especially in kind of thinking on what would any specific pieces of these make it easy to operationalize, difficult to operationalize? And then the last question, of course, is, are there any key ideas or structures that are either in here or not in here that we think should be in Austin ISD's theory of action, and why?
Yeah, and Dr. Maxwell, I think it's always important to just reinforce, when we say operationalize, what we're responding to is kind of what the previous iteration of the strategic plan looked like. And if you think, for those that were around back prior to 2020, there was an effort similar to this that progressed to a certain point, and that was really needed. I think it was intended to go from 2020 to 2025. And at the end of the day, what we received or what we built was a mission statement, value, and then a series of strategies. When you look at the strategies, they're almost impossible to operationalize. Like you can look at them and you can sit there and think, okay, well, what does this mean in Austin ISD? And I think when you look back at that moment and the fact the pandemic happened and a couple other things, we were never able to truly incorporate what that body of work represented at that time. And we do not want that to happen here. So you're going to continue to hear myself and Dr. Maxwell and others talk about, okay, when you say this, this is how we would actually enact that, or this is one way that we could consider that, so that when there's extreme clarity, when this becomes board policy, you know how the administration is going to respond and what's going to happen, because these words are now like part of our combined at work. Like, I mean, I just wanted to kind of reinforce that because when we talk about operationalizing the words.
So I have some thoughts. I like the little graphics. They're easy to follow, and I think that's actually really important, that whatever you do, there should be a logic that's easy to follow. So this one, our AE local, I didn't really like it. I felt like it was very vague until I got to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where it's actually talked about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship. I was like, okay, that that resonated with me. Because it gave me a hint about what we were hoping our students would, it centered our students. And I think that's maybe what was missing for me from these, is I was like, is this centering the system or is it centering students? And what I was missing in was like, what is our belief about students? The only hint of what our belief about students is that shows up is that they increase their outcomes. And I think they're right, they're a lot fuller, they're a lot more than that. And then I kind of had this idea, like I like the if, I understand the if-then structure, but I'm wondering, instead of saying if we provide, wouldn't it be interesting if we instead said something like if students experience? And then it talks about like the actual student experience rather than like what that centers the student. Like if the student experiences a sense of belonging, or if a student experiences an engaging curriculum, or if a student experiences teachers that they can relate to, that represent their ethnic background, or, whatever it is. It's kind of like, it kind of shifts the whole thing. And so I thought I don't know, that could be a fun sort of brain exercise to think about.
And we'll have the opportunity, and so you know what's coming, we will be like creating some if statements that could be structured that way exactly, right?
Not exactly the prompt between like the similarities and the differences, but a noticing, is that okay?
Sure.
So our AE local, we haven't always had strong systems that would ensure opportunities for equity. Like if your system's weaker, you have gaps and you have spaces where things can fall through the cracks. And so we've needed dramatic improvement in our systems, and I think we're definitely getting there thanks to y'all. And this is managed. This is operating on like if we build a really good system and we manage it with fidelity, the stuff will like trickle down to kids, which on one hand I'm totally with, and then on another hand I'm like, that's not quite the valence or vibe that I'm particularly feeling. I don't want to be managed all the time. I want an opportunity to create and to love and to live into possibilities. And where we are now is we're going to manage the heck out of it. And we're going to squeeze that rock until it produces, the whatever. And then the whatever is like the kid's going to be able to self-regulate. And the kid's going to be able to stay in, like, forgive me for this, but the kid's going to be able to stay in their box. They're going to be able to stay in their lane. They're going to be able to follow this line. They're going to be, they're going to get this student outcome on this test. That's not what I want for my kids, definitely not for me. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, those are all good things. But I don't see a kid like just blooming into possibility through this. I see a kid who is docile and compliant and follows the rules. And I'm just not really, that's not where I want to go. So this is like a highly competent document as it is, and yet I'd love us to push through and operationalize that competence into a sense of opportunity and possibility. And that means the teacher training looks a certain way, and it means teacher support looks a certain way, and teacher expectations or expectations of teachers look a certain way. And where it hits kids, I really love the framing of an if statement that centers kids first and has us see it through the lens of when a kid receives a type of support, this is what we expect to see happen, because a rose blooms when watered well, sort of thing.
I would say, in response to what's been said, and in response to our caller today who said, please don't make this full of eduspeak. The examples I see here, especially the two at the bottom, are pretty eduspeak heavy. And I don't think they're going to tell our families who we are, what we believe, and why they should choose us. I think it speaks to people who work in a building like this. And, when you say high quality standards aligned curriculum, that doesn't mean a lot to our families. When you say robust multi-tiered systems of supports, you have to spend a whole lot of time with us to understand what that means. I think the sample theory of action at the top, captures some things, but I don't see how that gets to people graduating with critical thinking skills, because it doesn't say a whole lot about what is in that curriculum, how we are approaching that work. We could just prepare kids who are really good at taking a test. It doesn't say a whole lot. Culturally responsive gets you a little closer, but it still doesn't say what kids are experiencing in the classroom and on the campus. So I I do really like the idea of finding a way to capture what we need to capture, and talk about systems, because that is obviously part of this, but talk about what that means for our students' experience and define it in a way that gets closer to those hopes and dreams, right? Because what we're really talking about is our hopes and dreams for our students. What do we want our students to get in the 13 years, 14, 15 years they're with us? And what is our hope for them? And we see it when it works well, right? We see it at graduation. We see it when we go to campuses. We see it when it works well. And sometimes we see it when it's, a much more narrow vision of education. And I think we fight hard as a community to have that big, exciting, the thing that everyone's really running toward, instead of just like, okay, this is okay. And I really hope we can get to something that speaks a language our community relates to as we're capturing this. And I really love the idea of that student experience. When we do this for students, when our students have this at school, because that is what it's about.
Thank you. I agree with the call that Trustee Singh put forward for more student-specific language in this and more specificity in defining what that student experience is. And I also wonder, based on the examples that you've provided, is that common, or is that expected for a theory of action, or is there a space to do that within the framework of a theory of action?
Not at all. They're actually two examples that were chosen because they are very different, and so it allows for like thinking through different languages, different approaches to this. You can look at, when you look at this across school districts, they all look very different. And so, I mean, a theory of action in general is an if-then statement. So that usually is the structure for a theory of action. But as far as districts go, or what we're looking for here, these are just two, examples. These were just generated to think through, if we focused on this, or if you focused on this, this could be a theory of action. They're actually intentionally have a very narrow focus for that reason, so you could see what it would look like if it has a very narrow focus versus if it has a little more of a broad focus, and some different inputs that are going into it.
I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that.
I think, yes, you have, I think we, the board, when we arrive at the end, there will be the opportunity to create the tailoring that's required to make it truly Austin, ISD. I will always be the person who looks at this and say, okay, me as a leader, or some future leader, or some future administration, how are they going to interpret this? Because I don't have to look back too far for an attempt to do this and have it not yield what we wanted. And there's lots of broad language in the previous iteration of this that was approved in 2020 to take us through 2025. And certainly the pandemic had an impact, but I don't want us to look back 5 years and say, hey, all these things that sounded great, because they were too broad and too vague, we were not able to implement. And so I think as long as we're kind of having that conversation and we're understanding what this looks like and how we're interpreting it, I think we'll be in a good spot. But we don't have to look too far back to see something that didn't work out so well. And again, the pandemic was huge, so I want to acknowledge that.
I just want to throw 6 vague terms into the mix. I would like to, what I don't see in these, what I'd like to see is a whole child focus that goes beyond academic outcomes. I would like to see developmentally appropriate practices that address kids as human beings and learners. I would like to see beyond state testing, meaning, yes, we want our kids to succeed on state testing, but not at the expense of, or not in place of, higher outcomes. I would like to see a focus on families as partners, like the dual capacity framework, but like looking at it as not just as people to be informed, but people to be partners in their kids' learning. I would like to see teacher professionalism, so we're not de-skilling teaching, but we're emphasizing, even as we face a huge number of uncertified teachers and new to the profession, that we still honor and focus on developing the teaching as a profession, not as robots. And I would like to see joy in there, that learning is done in joyful places through joyful means. So those are very vague, but I think those are the kind of guiding principles I would like to see in something.
So I have kind of two lines of thinking on this. The first thing is around structure and syntax. This first one is just, to me, out of order. This would look exactly like the other one if you said, if we provide principals, instructional specialists, district-wide, blah, 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 then we would be supporting the art of teaching and learning, which would result in students graduating as critical, blah, blah, blah. So that's just a syntax difference, the structure on this. And I think it reads better when you do the if, then, and then result. That's very clear and aligns with taking actions. The way this first one is written is out of order to me. So that's just a structural comment. The other thing that I like about this, I'm still always going to, go back to SBS and scores and kind of that type of instructional setting. This middle box to me is the setting. If we're looking at a unifying principle across the district, all the classrooms are different. Every school campus is going to be different, but this middle box is kind of the universal element. Every classroom is going to deliver rigorous, consistent instruction, or every classroom is going to, provide students with specific academic and social emotional interventions in a safe. So there's a setting that promotes the result that you're getting in the third box. And then the first box is, how do you create that setting? That's the way I see these three. And even if I'm restructuring that first one, the setting is an environment that supports the art of teaching and learning, right? It's a little vague on that first one, what the environment is. But I think if we looked, kind of back chaining this is, what is the result we really want? What is the setting that promotes that result? And then how do we support creating that setting? That would be, to me, the way that you would chain those. And how you phrase it, whether you're saying we're supporting the teachers, that results in the students getting something. If we say the student needs to get this thing, then we backchain to what do we do to support the student getting that thing. But all of those, to me, in that middle box is the key component is, we're going to be successful if we create this type of learning environment. And I think that ties into Trustee Kaufman's comments about, I want an environment that's joyful. I want an environment that's engaging. I want an environment where the student feels safe. Because again, I think those are some of the critical elements for a student being, not just the student, but the student being receptive to learning and the teacher being able to teach to the best of their ability. I think that there's some strong environmental factors. And then if we provide is, how do we support the staff? How do we support the students? How do we, even in the physical sense, create that environment so that then we can have that performance that results in our outcome that we're looking for. Last thing I'll say on that is, again, to beat my drum here is, I would have kids come back to scores or SBS doing turnarounds or doing, that they kind of in for the rest of the day, and they would perform well in my classroom because we were consistent. And the issue was they would go out to classes and every classroom was slightly different. And beyond just the normal scope of variation, when people have different rules and different expectations, that's very difficult for students. So if that's the outlier, what I'm looking for is, what is the consistent setting that we're sending these students to? And again, I think safe, obviously good instruction, but safe, joyful, welcoming, so that they can then perform. And that's how I would look at framing this.
Okay, any other thoughts on this part?
Yeah. Yeah, so when I look at this and, hearing Dr. Kaufman and Trustee Dioriste's feedback, I think there are guidelines that do this. So what our families are looking, so MTSS and all these other things are tracking referrals. That's all like super specific, and that's stuff we're already required to do, and our families want us doing beyond those requirements. So, and I strongly believe that if we follow human development and family science proven practices. I mean, this isn't just a belief, this is proven that if our students have what they need, they will achieve the outcomes that the state requires us to, above and beyond what the state requires for them. And these standards already exist. They're already evidence-based at a national level. You have NIAC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and you have AMLE, it's for the middle school. It's for adolescents up to 9th grade. So there's already these standards that exist and that are really affordable because this is just a group. These are just the experts who are doing it. So I think looking at those experts and having our schools and be a place where we are training professional experts. That's what teachers will want to stay here. They'll want to come here. Right now, I think a lot of the developmental appropriateness comes from I would say the campuses and parents, like the teachers and parents want that, and they feel like they're having to fight for it within our really restrictive state system. Or from the district where there's having to be this compliance. So I want a theory of action that develops that and allows it. So when I see stuff that's like, oh, they really consistent instruction, I don't know what I want expert instruction. I want, in your class, it was, you were consistent. You were an expert. It wasn't that every SCORES classroom has to look exactly the same. But what was consistent was the safety, was those things. So I think it's something that's so above and beyond. I walk into one class and they're finishing the sentence of someone else. So I really hope that this is an opportunity to have that North Star be something else than the literal STAAR, the star.
Okay, thank you. We actually combined what we were going to do next because we already started looking at our district's theory of action, which is really just kind of a look at that, what we have currently, if you haven't taken a look, and thinking through, is there something that we are seeing in this conversation that we're talking about that is missing from our current theory of action? Because I don't know if you want to devote time for that specific instruction or if you just want to go on to creating a then statement, some then statements, and some. So in that order, we're going to start with what we want to see in our students as the ultimate goal, and then from that backwards design, if we do that, then what are the actions we need to take to really make sure that our students get there in the end? Do you want to take time on our current theory of action, or you just want to move on to the then statement? Crafting some then
I'd love
statements.
to speak about our current theory of action, which I was not on the board when this happened. I was a community member, and I think a lot of people didn't love the process.
Okay.
And I'm not sure it says a lot. And I'm not sure, I think it's probably, to me, a good thing to start fresh and think about what we're looking at and where we want to go rather than where we've been.
Can I ask a question on that? What was the process at the time? Do you remember?
We can talk about it later. It was a consultant who hadn't, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
It just, I don't feel like it was, I wasn't the only one who felt that way, and there were probably people who loved the process, but I'm not sure. We're in a very different place, and I would love to start fresh.
Sure.
And I apologize, now I understand my confusion, because I was responding. When I read compared the different theories of action, I put ours in the mix, so I was jumping ahead. I guess I made clear that I don't like our current theory.
Right, yeah, that's our current one, yeah. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to then statements? Okay.
I thought one thing that was interesting, just an observation that I had as I've moved into this role and in my previous role, is very few people in the organization actually knew what our theory of action was. My hope is that when we get to a point where we actually have it defined, if it's 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it ends up being for us, like we collectively know what it is, our leaders know what it is, we can speak to it, like this just didn't become that for whatever reason.
Good.
And I don't even know that people knew that it was in our policy. And so I think it's a unique opportunity, and I think you'll see us begin to talk about it in that way once we get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I would say, like, onto that, I would say more than just like, oh, everyone knows it, like it's this like scary, weird chant or something that we do, like everyone feels proud of it, feels ownership in, like this is something we all like.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think, no, that's all well said.
So you would suggest it starting with the students?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what it needs to, I would suggest that, starting with the then statements, thinking about our students first, and then the actions that we would take as a board, as a district, as a community, that we have eventually agree on, like, these are the actions, these are the critical actions that we will take to make sure that our students have this outcome. So this next exercise is about that. Fast forward 5 years, if the district is wildly successful, what will be true about all of our students that is not true today? And so let me also just say a little bit about that statement. I'm not saying what isn't true about any of our students today, but rather every single one of our students, we would want this to be true about each and every student. So some students it may be true about today, but some it may not be true about today, which means those are the things that we need to define. What actions should we take then to make sure every student is this in the end, right? So this is an activity called Think, Inc. Pair, Share. So you're going to think first a little bit on your own. You're going to write. That's the Inc. part. What you think, some top 2 suggestions that are outcomes, and those are the then statements. You're going to pair up with whoever you're sitting next to, or if you want to talk with a board member across the room, that's certainly fine. And then just share what you have. You may think sometimes you just listen to what somebody else has said, and so you might revise what you have a little bit, because we learn from each other when we get to talk about things. And then we're going to actually be able to each share out. And as we share out, I'm going to go ahead and transcribe what you're saying, so that we're transcribing all the possible then statements that we could have. I'm saying top 2 then statements. You just may have a top 1 then statement that you think this, if we just did this thing, that would be good. So at least 1 per board member, and maybe 2, up to 2. And then we're going to do a little activity where we prioritize those then statements to really think through which are the pieces that we really would want to be incorporated into an ultimate then statement. So think about those most important outcomes for our students. These are all measurable outcomes, but they are also larger than just measurable by assessments. How would we know that a student is ready for post-secondary? Maybe something, yes, we can measure with CCMR, but there could be other things that we see in our students that we think, okay, the student is now ready for life. And then write those 2, your top, at least 1 or 2 then statements down on you can use a Post-it note or some scratch paper that you have, and then we'll pair up in just a minute to discuss. So I'll give you a few minutes to write those, and then we'll pair up. Clear? Does that make sense? Then statements that you want? Okay.
Yeah, I think then I guess, think of the students' experience framing, then students would experience reduced performance gaps. Or student populations.
I feel bad because this is like way too flowery and it's a lot of words.
Do I need another piece of chart paper?
But for me, this is what I believe. So I'll just read it first before you even do
Okay,
that.
maybe I'll.
Then so you can truncate it.
Okay.
Then students will be able to tell you with confidence and joy what they're going to do after high school, and will have the knowledge and skills and dispositions to realistically get there.
Okay. Then students will be able to tell you, I mean, we could write it as is. I don't think we need to.
With confidence and joy.
Okay. I might need to write smaller though. Then students will be able to tell you with confidence and joy.
Communicate, tell you. Sure.
Tell you with confidence and joy.
What they're going to do after school or after high school, after they leave us, after high school. And we'll have the knowledge and skills and dispositions to get there. We call it the KSD framework and trademark it and make it all edgy speaky.
Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, and part of the reason I thought of that is because I remember, I was like, I know I've had this conversation before, but a couple of scorecards ago, this was one of our goals, and we came up with a very complicated way to measure it. I don't even know if you were part of all of that.
I was not part of it.
But I actually did kind of like it because it was something that wasn't just a test score, but it showed that students developed a competency and an interest besides academics. So we were looking at if they did like a CTE or if they did music or sport or
Right.
something over multiple years.
I see. Yeah. I see that.
Andrew and I both had one that was more narrow, that then every student will be connected to at least one trusted adult on campus. One of us said one and one of us said two. And it's measurable because we have campuses already that are choosing to measure it. And to build on what Trustee Wheatley-Chu has said about the NIAC and the AMLE, the high school kind of analog to that is schools of opportunity. And that's one of the things that they really have found is a really strong measure of schools that really work for students.
So I had students would be active and engaged in their educational process. And I think that was a broad umbrella for a whole bunch of metrics that you could do. You know, you could look at attendance, you could look at course completion, you could look at graduation rates, student retention, you know, kind of across the board. But the idea that being that students are actively engaging in the educational process every day.
What occurs to me is that students have needs all the time. So an outcome is that students get what they need when they need it. And that's very vague, but that's kind of needs to be vague because what they need could be academic, what they need could be therapeutic, what they need could be, there's so many things. But it is not true today that kids get what they need when they need it. And it's a great challenge.
Okay, then, guess somebody give me a mic. When they need it, right? What they need when they need it.
And I have one that's not specifically a student outcome, but is an outcome that profoundly impacts our students, which is that every student will attend a school where parents are engaged as partners. Yeah, then every student will attend a school where parents are engaged as partners.
Okay, another one somebody would like to share? Till we get through? Mm-hmm. Then students will have the tools and confidence to uphold our democracy. Mm-hmm. You offered. I know. She just came up and took the pen. Okay, did we capture all the then statements? I feel like we have one that talks about like critical thinking, like
Then students will be sort of like.
Microphone, please.
Then students will be active, creative, critical thinking learners.
okay, active, creative, critical thinking. This keeps going up. Critical thinking learners, I think. Okay, did that capture all of them so far?
I have another one about belonging, which is then every student will be engaged in coursework or extracurricular activity beyond the basics or beyond what's required. capturing something about being part of a community, having a sense of belonging, and to what Trustee Urioste was saying about being active and engaged in their education. I just said, then every student will be engaged in coursework or extracurricular activity beyond the basics or beyond what's required. Everyone will have a thing.
Sorry, I had to log back in to see. Okay, I think did we capture all of the then statements? Everyone's feels good? Okay. Could we put yeah, thank you. Okay, last piece here is to do an activity that helps us visualize consensus. So, what student outcomes of all of these, what then statements, thank you, I think we're, yeah. What then statements do you think are the most important? We're gonna use affinity dots for this. So in your folder, you have colored dots, you have more than you need, but you can't use all your dots. You can only use up to 3 because you have to prioritize. What would be the 3 that you think are the top ones that absolutely should be included? And once color does not matter. Yes, come up to the chart and put your dot next to the statement. Okay, so that helps us just see which ones we would prioritize most because we can't choose everything, right? 4 dots on this one, 4 dots on this one, I think we would definitely prioritize. and then look through, we've definitely got 3 dots on some of them. This one clearly has the most, right? So we would want to, as we're going back after this, we would definitely want to, as a group, take a look at these again as administration and board members and think through, okay, how would we wordsmith these things together then to capture a then statement that really does show what we prioritized and then kind of really demonstrate what we want in our students as ultimate outcomes. Okay, and then I know we're running a little bit behind, so I think the next activity is identifying, oh, sorry, that was my computer, not the, did I put it in my pocket? Yes. Coming up with some if statements. So, thinking through, based on these prioritized then statements, if we were going to craft some if statements, then think through the actions that we would need to take as a district that would get us to these prioritized then statements, to get us to what this would look like for ultimate student outcomes. So as an example, and I just pulled these from the sample theories of actions that we already had, if we invest in principals, instructional leaders of their campuses, if we provide quality standards-aligned curriculum, we had another option earlier, if students experience, right, you could word it that way, but starting with that if statement and then some kind of action that we are doing on our parts that would result in the outcome for our students. So each of you will write 3 if statements on sticky notes, and then we're going to put all those sticky notes together and then group them into themes for our last activity. So 3 if statements for the actions that we would take, each on a separate sticky note. Give you about one more minute. Okay, so as soon as you finish your 3 sticky notes, there are 2 blank chart papers over there just to give you some space. You're gonna put all of the notes on the chart paper, and then you as a group will look through the sticky notes and group them together by theme. So as example up here, let's say there are 3 different notes about teacher professional development and 2 more that have to do with teacher coaching. That becomes a theme. You put all 5 notes together, and the theme is building teacher capacity. So we're going to end up with some themes around the if statements. Trustee Sings just got volunteered for that. Okay. Maybe we'll have some volunteers from the dais that want to come up and put them together as themes. Yeah, that'd be great.
Doc, I should have trusted the process because I was immediately thinking this.
And Dr. Kaufman's already started.
Yeah.
And then will one of y'all, Pace or Wilson or Emerson, will y'all take a chart paper, pen, and just identify what the theme is and write it above it or right next to the group? Okay, I think what we'll do is go ahead and wrap up. We're gonna end up with three different buckets? Okay. So ideally, right, you come up with very specific if statements, but there usually emerge some common themes. And so you would think, okay, how would we be able to use these separate if statements and incorporate some of the language in these if statements that go with these common themes to create a strong if statement that, for example, I can't read all the, well, I see the last one says teacher support and development. That focuses around teacher support and development, but it has some specificity from those if statements that's connected, right? So you got some themes that help you prioritize, and then next step, along with writing the then statement that reflects the prioritization here, you would write some if statements that reflect the themes of the if statements that we got tonight. So I think we have 4 buckets. What are they? So, Dr. Wilson, will you read the buckets to me left? Student-centered classrooms with real-world learning experiences. Okay. Family and community engagement. Curriculum and academic supports. Okay. Okay.
Like whole child development.
Mm-hmm. Whole child development. So that might, if it doesn't group with another one, then it would just be its own theme. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Safe, inclusive teaching, learning environment, teaching and learning environments, and then teacher support and development. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and board members. Appreciate that. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but we'll talk about next steps again. So a little bit of that process there. Now we'd go back and start developing a proposed theory of action and draft some if-then statements that represent what we did, what the work that we did here, and then go through a feedback, refinement, and stress testing, where we're collecting additional feedback, doing some logic tests. Does X actually logically lead to Y? Are we missing a big variable? And then a resource check, which is a big piece of it. Do y'all feel like that accurately represents the themes?
Yeah, I was wondering about.
Do you need to find a mic?
But I don't wear a tie. I was wondering if it's artificial or if it makes sense that these end up being grouped in a kind of way that's kind of holistic. So we didn't end up with this, but you could have like admin, campus, classroom, or something like that.
Okay,
but
like different levels at which you would do these sort of actions.
But ours might have shaped out to be like parent community, teachers, and I don't know, I'd have to think it through. But I wonder if holism works for a theory of action. So in other words, if at this level it's parents, if at this level it's community, if at this level it's kids, something like that.
Okay.
I don't know if it groups that way when you play with it.
It might.
Or if that's even important.
Well, I think in the process, and I think this describes it this way too, you could come up with a couple of versions of theory of action that might capture it a few different ways and see which one really more reflects the thinking of the group. And then ultimately, final piece would be adoption and alignment into board policy, into our local policy, and really start setting that vision for how we think about teaching and learning and build everything from there. So last questions. I know we're running over time here. So anything else that you hope this process includes or considers, or any additional thoughts, questions, things that you want us to consider moving forward?
I would just say that I really appreciate this activity and exercise and the thoughtfulness around its construction. And I really like, I think Superintendent Segura, you said something about like living into this. I would want us to if we spend this time and encumber folks' time, that we create something that truly reflects who we are, truly reflects our aspirations and our hopes and our sort of visionary guidance as a board, and that it becomes like a document that's breathed. And, you know, kind of something that, like, so many of us are like a local, like, I had to reread it and I was kind of appalled. And maybe that's why I haven't read it in 4 years. But I would love a document that I actually go back to, and that a principal or a teacher or a principal or even a student could pick it up and like see themselves and feel good about it and be like, this is my district. So I like this process as something that creates something that we truly take on.
Yeah, I think there's something Trustee Willie Chu said, and I think you're certainly reinforcing it. When we get to the point where we have theories of action that are in our board policy, I would expect as we present to the board or lay out budget items or talk about initiatives, you'll be able to crosswalk that aspect of the work with like these elements within the theories of action, right? It should be embedded within our system, even to the point where when you look at documents, right, that we're producing in the administration, they clearly tie back to an element in it. Like there are best practices. There are entities that do that. Some school districts, not many, but if you do that, and you get to that point, I then think you have a truly like sound system where everybody understands how it's all connected. And I think just generally speaking, hasn't been the case for us. So I'm right there with you. I totally agree. And also, I know we're talking about next steps or maybe other things that you'd want to incorporate. So we presented before a roadmap of the overall effort. This is one like aspect of it. And I think as Dr. Maxwell mentioned earlier, it's important to reinforce the programmatic component, right, which is going to consume a lot of time, right, with our community, with you all, and there'll be space for it, you know, dual language, you know, magnet programs, single gender programs, you know, early college, high schools, like all of it, right? That is a big thing that we have to talk about. And so that is also part of the larger body of work. So I just want to remind everybody, like this is one piece of it. We presented previously on a roadmap. There's more details in here, but certainly want to hear feedback, not only on this piece, but all the other pieces. And that may just require more time with the document, right? No big, but wanted to just make sure that was clear.
We good?
I would just say one thing for the hope on this process would be that, particularly around this theory of action, that the final product is very intelligible, like very accessible. You know, just throwing out there as a metric, like I would be really happy if our final statement was something that the average middle schooler in our district would be able to understand by the time they're, you know, those 3 years, that they have a complete understanding of it so that they understand what they're doing in high school.
We're listed for an executive session. I don't think there is anything can't miss, or do you have something we have to talk about?
I mean, 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're going to have a very brief executive. That's okay. Okay. So we will now recess the open meeting at 9:16 p.m. Move to a 5-minute, very brief executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code sections 551.074, 551.072, 551.073, 551.087, 551.076, 551.0821, and 551.071. When we finish with executive session, we'll briefly return to the open session to formally adjourn the meeting, and the adjournment will be recorded and included in all replays of tonight's meeting. Okay, we will now reconvene at 9:38 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 9:38 p.m.